a black family from the Kentucky hills, standing in their Sunday best, captured in the summer of 1912. The father's hand rests on his wife's shoulder. 3 children sit perfectly still, their eyes fixed on the camera. Behind them, a modest wooden porch with a creek winding through the background. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable, or so it seemed for over a century. But when a team of historians digitized this image in 2023, they noticed something that made them catch their breath. A silver compass, half hidden in the father's vest pocket. Its needle pointing not north, but directly at the youngest child. And in the mother's hands, a handkerchief folded into a pattern that hadn't been seen since the days of the Underground Railroad. These weren't fashion choices. These weren't accidents. They were codes, signals, a message hidden in plain sight for over 100 years. A message that would expose one of the most dangerous secrets of the Jim Crow South. What this family was really doing could have gotten them killed, and the truth behind this photograph is about to rewrite everything we thought we knew about resistance in America. This is their story. The photograph appeared at a small estate auction in Lexington, Kentucky, on a humid September morning in 2023. Docker. Patricia Morrison had almost skipped the event. The auction house specialized in antique furniture, not historical documents. And she had a faculty meeting scheduled for noon. But something in the catalog listing caught her attention. A collection of photographs from a demolished house in the eastern Kentucky hills, some dating back to the early 1900s. She arrived late, slipping into the back row just as the auctioneer held up a wooden box filled with sepia-toned images. Lot 47, he announced. Assorted photographs, circa 1910 to 1920. Unknown subjects, starting at $50. Patricia raised her paddle almost without thinking. She won the lot for $75. That evening, in her cramped office at the University of Kentucky, she spread the photographs across her desk. Most were unremarkable. Stiff portraits of unidentified families, faded landscapes, a few damaged beyond recognition. But one image made her pause. It showed a black family of 5 standing on a wooden porch. The father wore a dark suit, his posture rigid but dignified. The mother sat in a chair, her hands folded in her lap, holding what appeared to be a white handkerchief. 3 children surrounded them. 2 boys and a girl, the youngest no more than 5 or 6. Patricia studied their faces. There was something in their expressions that didn't match the formal pose. A tension around the eyes, a guardedness that seemed deliberate. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "The Crossing, summer 1912. The Crossing." Patricia frowned. She knew every major black community in the Kentucky hills from that era. She had never heard of any place called The Crossing. She pulled out her magnifying glass, a habit from decades of archival work, and leaned closer to the image. That's when she saw it. In the father's vest pocket, barely visible against the dark fabric, was the glint of something metallic. She adjusted her desk lamp and looked again. A compass, a silver compass, and its needle wasn't pointing north. Patricia spent the next 3 hours examining the photograph under every light source in her office. The compass was real. She was certain of it now. She could make out the delicate engravings on its casing, the thin black needle suspended behind glass. But what disturbed her was the direction. In every compass she had ever seen, the needle pointed north. Magnetic north. Always. This needle pointed downward, toward the bottom of the photograph, toward the youngest child. She told herself it had to be a trick of the angle, a distortion from the old camera lens. But the more she studied it, the more intentional it seemed. The father's body was angled slightly, his vest pulled open just enough to reveal the compass, as if he wanted it to be seen. And then there was the handkerchief, Patricia had almost missed it at first. The mother's hands were folded so naturally, the white cloth seemed like nothing more than a decorative accessory. But under magnification, she could see that the handkerchief was folded into a precise geometric pattern. Triangles nested within triangles, forming a shape she recognized from her graduate research. It was a quilt code. During the era of the Underground Railroad, certain quilt patterns were believed to carry hidden messages for escaping slaves. A bear's paw meant to follow animal trails. A north star meant to travel at night. The patterns were stitched into quilts and hung on clotheslines. Visible signals that guided the way to freedom. But by 1912, the Underground Railroad had been defunct for nearly 50 years. Slavery had ended. The codes should have been obsolete. So why was this woman holding one in her hands? Patricia pulled up a database of census records and began searching for black families in rural Kentucky in 1912. She cross-referenced property records, church registries, and tax documents. Nothing matched. It was as if this family had never existed. She stared at the photograph until her eyes burned. 5 people frozen in time, hiding something so dangerous they had erased themselves from history. Patricia picked up her phone and called the only person she trusted with something this strained: James Turner, a retired archivist who had spent 40 years preserving black Southern history. "I need you to see something," she said. "I think I found a ghost." James arrived at Patricia's office the next morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a worn leather satchel filled with his own research files. He was 73 years old, with silver hair and hands that trembled slightly from decades of handling fragile documents. But his eyes were sharp, and when Patricia showed him the photograph, those eyes went wide. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. He held the image up to the window light, turning it slowly, studying every detail. His lips moved silently, as if he were counting something. "You recognize them?" Patricia asked. James didn't answer immediately. He set the photograph down and reached into his satchel, pulling out a notebook filled with handwritten entries. 1986, he said. "I was cataloging oral histories in Hazard County. Talked to an old woman named Della. Must have been 90 years old. She told me a story I never forgot." He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for. She said her grandmother used to talk about a family that lived on the edge of the swamp. Said they weren't like other folks. They came and went at strange hours. Always had visitors passing through. Strangers who arrived at night and were gone by morning. Patricia leaned forward. "What kind of visitors?" Della called them the walking wounded. Men and women running from something. Chain gang escapees. People fleeing debt contracts they couldn't pay. Families trying to get north before the local sheriff caught up with them. In 1912, but the Underground Railroad was. The railroad never really ended. James interrupted. It just went deeper underground. After Reconstruction collapsed, after the convict leasing system turned black men into slaves again, there were people who kept the old roots alive. They called themselves different things in different places. Some called it the Midnight Road. Others called it the Freedom Line. He tapped the photograph with a gnarled finger. And some called it the Crossing. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. Della's grandmother said there was a family who ran one of the stations. James continued. A man who could read the stars and a woman who could fold messages into cloth. They helped dozens of people escape. What happened to them? James's face darkened. She said they vanished. One day they were there. The next they were gone. The house stood empty. Nobody ever found out what happened. He looked at Patricia, his eyes heavy with old grief. If this photograph is what I think it is, you're not just looking at a family portrait. You're looking at evidence. And someone made very sure this evidence was never found. 2. Patricia spent the following week decoding the handkerchief. She consulted textile historians, quilt scholars, and experts on African-American folk traditions. Most were skeptical. The theory that quilt codes guided escaping slaves was controversial, considered by many to be more legend than fact. But Dr. Rosalind Carter, a retired professor from Howard University, looked at the photograph and went silent for a long moment. "This isn't a quilt code," she finally said. "It's something older. Something I've only seen once before." She explained that during the antebellum period, certain communities in the Appalachian region developed a secret language based on West African textile traditions. Patterns folded into cloth could convey complex messages. Safe routes, danger warnings, meeting times. The knowledge was passed down through women, Dr. Carter said, mothers to daughters, generation after generation. By 1912, most people had forgotten it existed. But in isolated communities, especially in the hills, some families kept it alive. She studied the photograph again. This pattern, the nested triangles, it's called a river door. It means there's a water route nearby, a way to escape by boat. Patricia thought about the geography. Kentucky was a maze of rivers, creeks, and hollows. If someone wanted to move people secretly, water would be the safest way. Harder to track than roads. Easier to disappear. But why would they put this in a photograph? Patricia asked. Why risk being discovered? Dr. Carter smiled sadly. Because photographs travel. They can be sent to people far away without raising suspicion. A family portrait mailed to a relative in Philadelphia or New York could carry instructions that no one else would understand. She pointed to the mother's eyes. Look at her face. She's not posing for a memory. She's sending a message. This photograph was never meant to hang on a wall. It was meant to save lives. Patricia stared at the image with new understanding. The rigid postures, the careful positioning, the half-hidden compass. Every detail was deliberate. This family had turned their own portrait into a map, and somewhere, over a century ago, someone had received this map and followed it to freedom. 2. The compass became Patricia's obsession. She had the photograph professionally digitized, enhancing the image until she could read the tiny engravings on the silver casing. The letters were worn but legible: J.W., Lexington, 1898. A silversmith's mark. James helped her search through historical records of craftsmen in Lexington, Kentucky. They found dozens of silversmiths from that era, but only one with the initials JW1. A man named Joseph Williams, who operated a small shop on Main Street from 1890 to 1915. More importantly, Joseph Williams was black. In an era when black-owned businesses faced constant harassment and violence, Williams had somehow maintained his shop for 25 years. His clients included wealthy white families, but also, according to a few surviving letters, members of the black community who paid in trade rather than cash. Patricia tracked down Williams's descendants through a genealogy website. His great-granddaughter, a woman named Margaret living in Louisville, agreed to meet her. Margaret was 81 years old, with sharp cheekbones and her great-grandfather's steady hands. She listened to Patricia's story without interruption, then disappeared into her back room and returned carrying a small wooden box. My mother gave me this before she passed, Margaret said. She told me it was great-granddaddy's secret, and I should never show it to anyone. She opened the box. Inside were 3 silver compasses, identical in design to the one in the photograph. But these compasses were different. Each one had been modified. The needle weighted on one end so it would point not north, but in whatever direction the maker chose. They're not for finding your way, Margaret said quietly. They're for sending messages. Granddaddy made them for people who needed to disappear. The compass would point toward the next safe house on the route. You just had to follow the needle. Patricia's hands trembled as she lifted one of the compasses. How many did he make? My mother said dozens. Maybe more. Margaret's voice dropped. He never wrote anything down. Never kept records. If anyone found out what he was doing, they would have burned his shop and lynched him in the street. She looked at the photograph Patricia had brought. That man, the father. He was one of the guides, wasn't he? Patricia nodded. Margaret closed her eyes. Then great-granddaddy helped them. He helped them all. With the compass mystery solved, Patricia turned her attention to tracing the actual escape routes. James introduced her to a network of local historians who had spent decades documenting the hidden geography of Black resistance in the South. They showed her maps marked with abandoned churches, forgotten cemeteries, and remote homesteads that had served as safe houses during the darkest years of Jim Crow. One name kept appearing in their records: the Red River Corridor. The Red River wound through the Kentucky hills, carving deep gorges through limestone and sandstone, creating a labyrinth of caves and hollows that had sheltered runaways for generations. During slavery, it had been a pathway for escape. After emancipation, it became something else, a smuggling route for people fleeing convict labor camps and debt peonage. The river was the safest way north, explained Thomas, a local historian who had grown up hearing stories from his grandparents. Roads were watched. Trains were searched. But the hills, white men didn't go into those hills. Too dangerous. Too many ways to get lost. He showed Patricia a hand-drawn map from the 1920s, passed down through his family. It marked locations along the Red River with small symbols: a star, a crescent moon, a simple cross. These were the stations, Thomas said. Places where you could rest, get food, wait for a guide to take you to the next stop. My great-uncle ran one of them. He had a farm on the river, raised hogs and chickens. But at night, he'd take people upstream in his boat, sometimes 2 or 3 a week. Was it dangerous? Thomas laughed bitterly. Dangerous doesn't begin to describe it. The sheriff had bounties on anyone caught helping runaways. Local vigilantes would shoot first and ask questions never. My great-uncle was nearly caught twice. After the second time, he moved his whole family to Philadelphia. Never came back. Patricia showed him the photograph. Thomas studied it for a long time. The crossing, he murmured. I heard that name before. My grandmother used it when she didn't want us children to understand. She'd say someone had made the crossing when they'd gotten out safely. He pointed to the porch in the photograph. Look at the railing. See those marks? They look like woodworm damage, but they're not. They're notches. Counting marks. Patricia squinted at the image. Counting what? Thomas met her eyes. People. Every soul they helped escape. That's their record. Carved right into their home. Patricia found the first hint of tragedy in the archives of a defunct newspaper called the Kentucky Mountain Echo. The paper had served the black community in Lexington from 1901 to 1922, publishing news that white papers ignored. Most issues had been lost to time, but a partial collection survived in the library of a historically black college in Frankfort. Patricia spent 3 days reading through crumbling pages before she found it. A small article from October 1912, buried on the back page. Fires destros Hemmelhabers Emimelis SNG Kasik. The article was only 4 paragraphs long. It described a fire that had consumed a farmhouse in rural Breathitt County. The family, a man, woman, and 3 children, had not been found. Local authorities suspected they had perished in the blaze, though no remains were recovered. The name of the property, Crossing Creek Farm. Patricia's heart pounded as she read the final paragraph. Sheriff's deputies report that the fire may have been deliberately set. An investigation is underway, though no suspects have been identified. She cross-referenced the date with other records. In September 1912, just weeks before the fire, a convict labor camp 40 miles away had reported 12 inmates missing. The camp warden had offered a substantial reward for their capture. 12 people escaped in September, vanished without a trace, and in October, the family at Crossing Creek Farm had disappeared. Patricia called James with the news. "Someone talked," he said grimly. Someone always talked. Could have been anyone. A neighbor with a grudge. A traveler who asked the wrong questions. Even one of the people they helped who got caught and broke under pressure. So the family was killed. Maybe. Or maybe they knew it was coming. Maybe they had their own escape plan. Patricia looked at the photograph again. The careful poses. The hidden symbols. The message folded into cloth. They knew, she said slowly. They knew they might have to run. This photograph wasn't just a map for other people. It was a record. Proof that they existed. Proof of what they did. Then someone needs to find where they went, James said. After 100 years, someone needs to finish their story. Patricia expanded her search northward. If the family had escaped the fire, they would have followed the routes they knew. Upriver through the hills, then overland to the rail lines that carried black migrants to Philadelphia, New York, Chicago. She focused on Philadelphia, the most common destination for refugees from the Kentucky hills. Church records, settlement house archives, and immigration documents from the Great Migration era were scattered across dozens of institutions. But Patricia searched them methodically. After 2 months, she found a thread in the records of Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, one of the oldest black congregations in America. She discovered a baptismal entry from December 1912. A family of 5, a father, mother, and 3 children, had been baptized together, an unusual occurrence for adults who would normally have been baptized as infants. The father's first name was Samuel. The mother's was Josephine. The children were called David, Elijah, and Ruth. No last name was recorded. The entry noted only that the family had arrived from the south under difficult circumstances and wished to begin a new life in the light of God. Patricia requested access to the church's auxiliary records, financial ledgers, correspondence, meeting minutes. In a folder of miscellaneous documents from 1913, she found a letter. It was written in a careful, educated hand and addressed to the church's pastor. "Dear Reverend Thompson, we are settled now, and the children are in school. Joseph works at the shipyard, and I take in washing. We do not speak of what we left behind, but we pray every night for those who helped us and for those we could not save. I am enclosing a photograph that was taken before we left. I want you to keep it safe. If anything should happen to us, please make sure the world knows what we did. We were not criminals. We were not cowards. We only wanted to live free and help others do the same. May God bless you and keep you. As Josephine." There was no photograph attached. Either it had been lost, or it had been deliberately separated from the letter. But Patricia knew. She had the photograph, the one Josephine had sent, the one that had somehow found its way back to Kentucky, waiting in a wooden box for over a century. The family had survived, and finding Samuel and Josephine's descendants took another 6 months. The family had changed their name after arriving in Philadelphia, a common practice among refugees trying to disappear. They had lived quietly, raised their children, and passed away in the 1950s without ever speaking publicly about their past. But their children had spoken to their children, and some of those children were still alive. Patricia tracked down Ruth's granddaughter, a retired schoolteacher named Gloria, living in a nursing home in New Jersey. Gloria was 94 years old, frail but mentally sharp. When Patricia showed her the photograph, Gloria began to cry. "Grandma Ruth used to talk about this picture," she whispered. She said it was the only proof they existed, the only proof of what her parents did. She said she lost it when she moved to New York in 1951. She never stopped looking for it. Patricia sat beside her, holding her hand. "Your great-grandparents saved lives," Patricia said. "They ran a station on the Freedom Line. They helped people escape from convict camps and debt slavery. They risked everything." "I know." Gloria wiped her eyes. "Grandma Ruth told me the stories when I was little. She said Grandpa Samuel could navigate by the stars, and Grandma Josephine could fold messages into cloth that only certain people could read. She said they were heroes, but they could never tell anyone because it was still too dangerous." "Do you know how many people they helped?" Gloria was quiet for a moment. Grandma Ruth said she counted the notches on the porch railing once before they had to leave. She was only 8 years old, but she remembered the number. "How many?" Gloria looked at the photograph, at the family frozen in time, at the hidden compass and the folded message. 47, she said. 47 souls. That's how many her parents saved before they had to run. Patricia felt tears running down her own cheeks. 47 people. 47 lives that might have been lost to labor camps, chain gangs, or shallow graves in the hills. 47 families that existed today because a man with a compass and a woman with a handkerchief had refused to let injustice stand. "The photograph," Gloria said. "Can I keep it?" Patricia placed it gently in her hands. "It always belonged to your family. Now it's back where it should be." Gloria passed away 3 months after Patricia's visit. She died peacefully. The photograph framed on her nightstand, surrounded by 4 generations of descendants who finally knew the full story of their ancestors. At her funeral, more than 200 people gathered. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Samuel and Josephine's line, along with members of other families whose histories were intertwined with theirs. Many had never met before. They discovered connections stretching back over a century, threads of survival and courage that bound them together. Patricia was invited to speak. She stood before the congregation and told them about the photograph, the hidden compass, the folded handkerchief. She explained how Samuel and Josephine had turned a simple portrait into a coded map, a message that could save lives without raising suspicion. "They understood something that we sometimes forget," Patricia said. "That resistance doesn't always look like marches and speeches. Sometimes it looks like a family standing on their porch, posing for a picture, hiding a secret in plain sight." She spoke about the 47 people who had passed through Crossing Creek Farm, following the needle of a weighted compass toward freedom. Most of their names were lost, but their descendants were scattered across the country. Teachers, doctors, artists, parents, living lives that were only possible because 2 people in rural Kentucky had decided that no one should have to live in chains. Samuel and Josephine never got to tell their story, Patricia concluded. They lived in hiding, died in obscurity, and trusted that someday someone would find the truth. It took 111 years, but we found it, and now it belongs to all of us. After the service, Gloria's great-grandson, a young man named Marcus, named for the archivist who had first recognized the photograph's significance, approached Patricia. "I want to find the others," he said, "the 47, or their families. I want to tell them what my great-grandparents did for them." Patricia smiled. "That could take a lifetime." Marcus looked at the photograph in his hands. The father with his compass, the mother with her folded message, the 3 children who would carry the secret for generations. Then I'd better get started. The photograph hangs in Gloria's old bedroom now, passed down to her granddaughter. Beside it is a framed copy of the letter Josephine sent to Philadelphia in 1913. Samuel and Josephine's names have been added to an informal registry of freedom workers. Ordinary people who risked everything to help others escape injustice. They are remembered not with monuments or statues, but with something more powerful. Their descendants are still searching for the families of the 47. Some have already been found. The compass still points the way. If you're fascinated by hidden histories and secrets buried in old photographs, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. You won't want to miss what comes next.